So today, as Richard indicated, I'm going to be discussing a small conservation management trial, which we've deployed back in 2018 and working through to 2019, and is still in fact running. And it's looking at adding capacity to roost sites in areas where we found it might be a limiting factor to shorebird fitness. So just to add a little bit of context to how this came about, this is a spin-off. The trial is a spin-off from a larger project, Conserving Birds in Coombe Estuary, which is a project that BirdLife Australia is working on with BirdLife International Asia and local partners in Korea. And the study site is the Coombe Estuary and neighbouring Junghung Coast, which is in Seocheon County, the home of a lot of the natural ecology and Ministry of Environment. And we've been working with those guys there on what is the most significant site for migratory shorebirds in the Republic of Korea. So it's an enormous tidal flat, and it's just north of the infamous Simon Kung site. And NIE studies have found that over 178,000 migratory shorebirds are staged through this area over a 40-day period. So certainly a significant site. Of the 39 migratory shorebird species which utilise the site, 20 occur in internationally significant numbers regularly. So a number of those are listed species which occur in Australia, so critically endangered great knot and the eastern curlew are obviously of great conservation to Australia. So we started to work more closely with our friends in the
Chris, we've lost your audio. I think you've accidentally muted yourself.
Unmute. How's that?
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay, great. So when we got over there, we thought, how can we best complement the work that the locals are doing in this very progressive county, Seocheon County, on this Ramsar listed wetland, maintain or optimise the values of the site. And NIE had already demonstrated that that the feeding capacity was there within the mudflats, so we decided to look at roost sites. So we mapped out and documented the known roost sites within the region that was used by the shorebird population. And although the scale of reclamation on the Junghung Coast and Coombe Estuary is far less than the neighbouring areas in Simon Kung, we did find that there was an impact on the shorebird population as they were precluded on many of the high tides from roosting regularly in the area. And what we found of the major roost sites is that 7 sites north of the Coombe Estuary available on 54% of the high tides. So during 54% of the high tides, birds were either forced to fly up to 25 kilometres to dredge spoil ponds in Simon Kung or use artificial islands like Kumando. And that includes the world famous Ubido, which is a large island which has high significance for species like spoonbill sandpiper. So where are the birds going in these instances when the tide covers up what was left of the high roosts? So birds are roosting, even though it is still a significant site, birds are roosting on seawalls and dikes. They're popping over into aquaculture ponds, which we heard about earlier today. And they're even roosting on the very infrastructure which may have damaged their fitness in the first place, and that's dredge spoil pipes. So pretty ironic there. But the capacity for roosting for that amount of birds is certainly not there. So what happens with the remainder of the birds? Here's an idea. If you can see this video here, it's quite a stunning sight. Referred to as an aerial roost is really quite stunning, but also quite depressing when you realise how desperate these birds are. You can see them circling back and forth like planes in a holding pattern. And what they're doing is searching for a site just to land and rest out the rest of the high tide. But without any roosting options, circle and circle the coast, wasting that precious energy that in their staging areas. And so here you can see flocks of around 10,000 birds circling around an area which is the last high tide roost called Flyway. So this was one of the sites where we decided to put our bags. But how could we address this? And we thought there's probably little chance for us to get up our traditional methods of roost manufacturing, which involves a lot of terraforming and what recent progressive legislation in Korea had actually prevented building of any sites on top of intertidal area, which is great, but forced us to think outside the box. And it was then that I remembered a photo that a colleague of mine had shown me from a Marimbula oyster farm, coastal New South Wales in Australia. And it was an eastern curlew standing on an oyster bag. So these are bags that are used by oyster farmers, and it's an Australian invention. It increases the yield of oysters, but it also provides great shorebird high tides. And in fact, some of my studied areas in South Australia, you can see thousands of shorebirds roosting on floating weed rack. So the concept was there, and so I head up to New South Wales with a bottle of dry white wine and tasted some oysters, and also met the oyster farmers who were manufacturing these. And we started the roost trial. So the advantages of having a floating roost is that they're consistent throughout the tide cycle. They go up and down with the tide, and in that respect, they're immune to sea level rise. They're very easy to manipulate and move and install. Only a team of 3 or 4 people is required. And they're relatively cheap. As we heard from Danny, they're also immune to vegetation colonisation and terrestrial predators, because essentially they're like islands. So we started a proof of concept in the site where Danny was discussing, Western Treatment Plant, just to get an idea about whether shorebirds would the project back over to Korea. So we deployed in 2 Ramsar sites, Western Port Bay and the Hunter Estuary. And we got our proof of concept pretty quickly. We got a number of shorebirds utilising the sites, not only for roosting, but also for feeding, as the bags contain the oyster shell. We didn't want to grow oysters, but we left the shell in there, not only as a weight, but also a substrate for invertebrates to colonise, and birds were feeding on the bags. We also had some unexpected visitors like threatened fairy tern. So in April 2019, we head over during northern migration and deployed bags in some of the most significant sites. And the sites which we thought would be the last that birds accumulate at before the spring hits and forces them to the end. So here we are at Flyway. And seconds after we installed our first roost, we got out of the water, we climbed up the sea wall, and 2 Terek sandpipers landed on the bags. Days later, we had about 20 birds, including bar-tailed godwits, join them. A few weeks later, we had around 300 birds on a high tide at Flyway, and then the casts began to grow, and we got birds like black-faced spoonbill starting to use them, and then the capacity was really tested on southern migration. As soon as birds started arriving in August, the roosts were chock-a-block, and this is a screen grab from some of the footage we have, which shows around 500 birds stacking into one of the roosts at Flyway. So the results show that we had 58 species of birds across the sites, including 21 species of shorebirds. The site selection was quite interesting. So although the roosts were separated only by a few kilometres, we saw that one roost was used far greater. It was used 47 footings, so there were shorebirds on it. Neighbouring roosts only had 2% of that the birds were using. And we got an idea about the current format and how much capacity could be taken. And that was around, as I said, 500 small shorebirds. Obviously, abundances peaked around the times of migration. And during those times, at every high tide, we had 100% use of the, whether that be by small amounts of shorebirds or the larger proportions. And what we found, we put together a mixed model and looked at the conditions and found that use of the site was added largely by the max daily high tide, not the time at the time of roosting, but the max daily tide. The wind speed, which is natural, under 15 kilometres an hour, the birds were more likely to use the roosts and the weather. Now, we also investigated the thermal properties of the roosts. This we anticipated would be one of the deciding factors whether they would use them. So you can imagine the differences between roosting on a sandy beach and roosting on one of these bags, which the birds can still maintain their feet wet. It would be quite different. So here you can see some of the results. We had the floating roost on the left and the natural roost on the right, and it indicates that there is better insulative properties within the floating roost. They remained warmer in the cooler times and they didn't get quite as hot in the hot times. So potentially favourable thermal properties coming out of that as well. They also provide novel shelter. Birds seem to roost along the sides of them during high wind areas, even on low tide. I just want to stress here at this point that we consider this is still a trial and this is a last resort intervention just for emergency cases. So all efforts should be made to restore natural roosts before considering a floating roost. The last thing I want to see is floating roosts being trialled everywhere because these were only meant to be temporary infrastructure used in emergency situations while you're restoring natural sites. And that's where the study will go. So part of the next steps are creating decision trees to look at whether a particular site has the necessity and the feasibility to have a successful floating roost. And without those two things, I really can't encourage anybody to try a floating roost. At this stage, we're really still reining it in and tightening methods, including looking at non-plastic options, which is practitioners. So we're working with RMIT to look at things like mycelium and kelp-based and algal-based products, and also creating local economies using traditional crafts. As you know, Seocheon County has a very long tradition of fishing communities, so they have a long tradition of weaving and reed-based aquaculture products. So that's one thing to look at. We're also looking at the invertebrate studies, so that these bags are getting filled with enormous amounts of sediment which are caught in the cup of the oyster shell. The actual shells themselves are getting colonised by anemones and polychaetes, isopods, an enormous amount of invertebrate life which birds are feeding on. And also the mesh works to capture invertebrates which are based in the water column. So we have a lot of footage of avocets and spoonbills feeding in between the roosts, like the little shopping aisles. So there's a lot of work to be done there. As I said, site selection and looking into nocturnal studies as to how birds are using them throughout the night. I think there's a lot to do, but I couldn't have done any of this. This has been a little bit side of the desk project for me and a bit of a passion project. And I look forward to getting back over to Korea and dropping in on the guys at NIE who are based in Seocheon County and continuing this interesting collaborative project. And so thanks for everyone who's given me advice along the way and everyone who's walked through the mud and shoveled kilograms of oyster shell into bags and cut their hands. It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully we can come together and create a great product which will be available in these emergency circumstances. Thank you.